strugglingacademics.com.
Yes, welcome to Struggling Academics. I am Jan Pedersen, and today the topic will be dogheads. And we are going to talk a little in depth about what a doghead is, where it comes from, and how it is that we know something about these things, if there are things. Because you can be called a doghead, you can be a doghead, and you can have one as well. So these are at least three things we know from the very beginning. But dogheads go way back in time as a label and a designation. And I've been doing some archaeology, if you will. So I've been digging around in old books, and I've found a few entrances on dogheads. So, for example, in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Bible, you will find in the second book of Samuel, you'll find the character Abner, the commander Abner, and at some point he utters, "Am I a dog's head, which against Judea do shew kindness this day unto the house of Saul thy father?" And so that's an example of a text where we find the word doghead. The same goes for if we go a little forward in time to Pliny the Elder, which is one of the Roman historians whose work we still have access to. And he mentions that in Ethiopia and in India, there are places where you find very strange creatures. And these creatures are humans, but they have the head of a dog. And he cites some of the ancient tomes that we no longer have. And I struggle with the names, but Ctesias and Megasthenes, I think, is the names of these people. Then, of course, within Christianity, we have the legend of the Saint Christopher. So Saint Christopher is an important saint, especially for those who travel. And the story goes that he carried baby Jesus across a river at some point. And what was remarkable about him was that he had the head of a dog. So if you look at some of the Greek Orthodox iconography, you will find the image of Saint Christopher not with a human head, but with a dog head. Another work that we might consult is The City of God by Augustine of Hippo. So, of course, Augustine was one of the great church fathers. And in The City of God, there is a fantastic passage where he is discussing the idea that if dogheads, or this race of monsters or humans with dogheads, they really exist out there in India, are they then, creatures of God, or are they of a different sort? Are they demons or what have you? And he answers, well, if they have reason, and if they are alive and they are mortal, then yes, they are humans, even though they are having, a different kind of head that we are used to seeing. Pushing further up in time, there is a fantastic part of the medieval period where we get all sorts of strange, fantastic stories. And it's often called the Mirabilia genre. So you have all sorts of wonder stories or stories of marvel. And I think one of the greatest stories of that particular period is, and it's not just because I have a great passion for Aristotle, but it's Alexander's letter to Aristotle from India, which is obviously a fake. It is a fabricated letter, because then there never was such a letter. It was made at some point during the medieval period. And in there you find descriptions of an attack where Alexander was attacked by men with dog heads. And there is also another ancient or medieval manuscript called On the Wonders of the East. And those of you who've read, what's his name? Umberto Eco's Baudolino, you will find that he draws a lot on these particular manuscripts. There is a quotation here from the letter. We don't know the author, but it says that in the region outside of Babylon, which is desolate and filled with snakes, here likewise dwell the Dogheads, whom we call, and then I'm struggling here, Konoponie, maybe? I'm not entirely sure. And they have the manes of horses, the tusks of boars, and the heads of dogs, and they breathe fire and flames. In the medieval period, we also get to see the first writings of Marco Polo. And in Marco Polo's travels, he describes the Andaman Island in the Bay of Bengal. And there you find, and I'm quoting here, cannibalistic idol worshippers with heads like dogs and teeth and eyes like dogs as well. The Travels of Sir John Mandeville is another fake travel book that you may read today. Sir John Mandeville never existed. I believe it was perhaps a monk who sat in a monastery and composed the story. But he writes about Nicobar, also an island in the Bay of Bengal. And there he also describes the Dogheads as a race you may encounter. There's also a Benedictine monk, the Deacon Paul, and he wrote, how should I put it, a book in Latin called The History of a Lombard. So he's an Italian monk. And he, much to my distress, labels a person like me a doghead, because he talks about the Northerners, the people in Northern Europe. And to quote here, the Northerners are barbaric, cannibalistic, blood-drinking people with dog heads. So, and that particular designation, I believe, not to offend anyone, I think still holds today, in the sense that people from the south of Europe still believe the Northerners are barbarians to a certain extent. And you find it also on the British Isles. For example, there is a poem from Wales dating back to the medieval period as well, where we encounter or we hear about King Arthur, who fights heathens in the Highlands outside of Edinburgh. And guess what they look like? They are dogheads as well. Now, the final thing I'm going to talk about here in terms of the history, perhaps, and the tomes of knowledge we have available is a concept also from Britain called Cebut lupinum. And it refers to the wolf's head. A wolf's head in the medieval period in Britain was a criminal, an outlaw, someone whom anybody who came across that person had the right to kill. That's what it meant to be an outlaw on the Isles at that particular point. So if you are a wolf's head, you are a haunted man, so to speak. Anyone had the right to kill you. So I'm going to finish off by asking the panel here 3 questions. Since, if you've probably noticed, my language skills are so very poor, I wish to know how to pronounce doghead in Greek and in Latin. So perhaps some of you excellent people could help me with that. I also like to know if you've been ever called a doghead. I believe I have, to be perfectly honest, not by anyone from the south, but from a person of my own nation here. And then I'm wondering, in light of the wolf's head and also the dog head, does the idea of the dog head, has it anything to do with the notion of shape changes, werewolves, lycanthropy? These are my questions. Thank you very much. Tudor.
So, yeah. So, Dogheads, actually, to me, Dogheads doesn't ring any bell as in being seriously an attack, sort of swear word. To me, doghead is something you pet, Definitely in the culture where I'm coming from, there's no such curse as being doghead, you doghead. No. Doghead is something you pet on the head, feed from time to time. It's like a cat with fangs, but nothing else. But I know what you're saying. And by the way, that was amazing how you kept from, you could have gone a little bit further down and dug a little bit some Sumerian text on dogs, but other than that, you made a complete kind of review of everything that was important ever. But caput canis. That caput canis means head of a dog in Latin, as I remember, and I don't know Greek anymore, but I know Chinese. Chinese is gao to, which actually is written like a dog, a picture of a dog, and the picture of a head, which is the eye and part of the face, which is very nice. When you look at gao to, you can see a head and a dog together. So they kind of also nice. But all I can say about this before anybody else steps in is I remember the Egyptian gods, which were quite frequently represented with dog heads. And the one that I like most, of course, is the dog of chaos, the god of chaos, Set, the one that killed Osiris, I think. Yeah, Osiris. So the god who actually created chaos had different heads, of course, because he was like changing shape. But one of the heads was the head of a dog, which was really frightening. Kind of, that was chaotic. But the other two gods, I remember only one. There were two other gods that were responsible for, we call it psychopom, going into the other world, going with the soul to the other side. One of them I don't remember. That one was just the guy who was going with the soul across the border. And Anubis was the guy responsible for embalming. So when you died, you had Anubis come and kind of oversee that your embalmment is done okay. And he had the head of a dog. But I have other things to say, but let's hear other people here. Because anybody else?
Diana, perhaps.
I just not that I'm an expert, but in Greek is kynokephalos, with the plural form kynokephaloi, which means dog heads in plural, obviously. In Latin, I don't remember exactly, but I think Tudor is right, and it's been a term taken by the Latin, by the Romans from the Greeks. And but I remember something very interesting that you mentioned about the werewolves, not necessarily wolves or werewolves, but the fact that sometimes, because of the resemblance, the dog head resembles of a wolf head. And I remember that I read recently, probably you know it, Jan, very well, the novel by Hermann Hesse, Steppenwolf, it goes out of Hesse's way of writing completely off, and by the last half of the novel is about a magical theater in which the main character imagines himself as being all kind of creatures, one of them being a wolf with a head of a wolf, because he was considering himself one of a kind, a kind of half beast, half human, trying to take over the world and integrate and get over his solitude and stuff like that. But in his long dream, by the end of the book, he's sort of literally the image of a half wolf with a human body. And another thing, probably you stumble over it, but I don't know if you managed to go into running any research, is in the Japanese traditional no plays, which were medieval plays that were running for a whole day, targeting Japanese high society army people, and in between parts, I would say there were kind of intermezzos with all kind of demons. One of these demons being represented by a mask of a dog. But interesting enough is the fact that the dog mask, even if it was the spirit of a dog in the narrative of the play, it looks more like a demon than a dog. When I've seen the mask, they were nothing like a dog. They were more like, red demons with horns and teeth, like demons. This is what I taught in terms of dog heads. No, I've never been called a dog head. Maybe a dog headess or something. Or the North American continent, it's pretty plain and stupid in terms of term nuances, and they call you idiot. They don't bother to look deeper into dog head. And if you use it, I don't know, David, maybe I'm wrong here, but dog heads in North America, it's not such a common word to name someone who's wood head.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've been called something else head, but not dog head, right? But dog heads isn't much of an insult, I don't think. But we're removed from some of that history in North America, right? And I think that's why it's so important, the context that Jan gave us. And when I started looking it up, I'd heard of Dogheads before, through some of the having to read classics in college, of course, but actually really through more of my graduate studies work and reading people like Professor Clive Gamble's, who gets into some discussion of the historical context of wild men and dogheads and all these other type of fantastic creatures. And I actually had to, have to show how ignorant I am here. I kind of prepared a little bit. So I just started searching for, Kinocephalos and Kinocephalus, right? The kind of wholesale Latin copying of Kinocephalos. And, interesting enough, there's, of course, a species of baboon, which is the Cynocephalus, right? And this is definitely in the forefront of the minds of anthropologists and primatologists. But what I did come across was an article by E.A. Matters, who's a professor, I think, at University of Pennsylvania, in early medieval philosophy and so forth, and just early medieval historian. And she brought up a really interesting dialogue from the kind of late Carolingian period, looking specifically at this issue of the Kinocephalos. And it's fascinating because it gets into these heavy ideas of things like a world soul, what it means to have a soul, how do individuals and the Kinocephalos relate to the world soul, even things like, which, the emperor at the time, which I think was one of the last Carolingian emperors before they were replaced by the Etonians, actually brought these questions to the schoolmen, right? What is a world soul? How do all these other souls relate to this, if there is such a thing as a world soul and all of that? And I think it gets to the heart of it, at least the way that Matters breaks it down, is that one of the conclusions, which I find fascinating, was, okay, of course they go into Augustine, and this idea of, these monstrous humans, they're still part of God's plan, they're still human. But they go, well, why is it? And one of the reasons why they say, why is this? You go, okay, look at the accounts of Pliny and others and these Alexandrian romances, which they kind of took as real history. And it was, well, they appear to have rational souls. There's many reasons they list, and one of them being they are noted to have domestic animals themselves. These dog-headed men are known to have dogs themselves, right? And this idea of this kind of mastery over the world. And I would say, and I'll let it go from here, of course, there's a huge amount of overlap in the kind of gregarious social behavior of canids and humans, which probably goes a long way to explain why canids are the first species to be domesticated very early on in the Paleolithic period. But having a tiny bit of experience in trying to do research and being allowed to publish a little bit on dog domestication, I would say it's very interesting that I think there's an emerging narrative now that we know how far back dog domestication goes into the Paleolithic. And as we talked before about this really blurry line between us and Neanderthals, I think there's an emerging discourse that maybe this is one of those things that separates us from Neanderthals, this capacity to domesticate, and of all things, to domesticate dogs. And I find it very interesting that this old Carolingian argument over were dogheads humans or not, and one of the things was, yeah, they have to be because they have domestic animals. They have the capacity to control and domesticate, right? And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. That's perfect. I'm as a final comment here, I couldn't help thinking that it also ties into the idea of moral agency. So, for example, today it's becoming more and more popular to talk about non-human animals as moral beings in a sense. So, let's say the orangutan, which by the way means person living in the woods, I think. Is it a person? What is a person? And is it only persons that have moral worth, if you will? These kind of things are precisely the same. You find the same kind of arguments of pro and against in the literature, like you find in the discussion on Neanderthals. And that's very, very interesting, I think. But the time is up. And I think we need to leave it at that. So thank you very much for your input. And we'll close it. Thank you.
StrugglingAcademics.com